On December 6, 1941, Thomas "Tom" Carter leaned on the railing of the USS West Virginia, gazing out over the tranquil waters of Pearl Harbor. The breeze was soft, carrying with it the scent of salt and hibiscus flowers from the distant shore. Tom often found solace in these quiet moments before the ship's daily routines began. He'd been stationed here for 2 years, and though life at the naval base could be monotonous, the beauty of Hawaii made up for it. As a junior officer, Tom had dreams of rising in the ranks, perhaps even commanding his own ship one day. But more than that, he missed his wife, Emma, back in San Francisco. Her letters always came with the faint scent of lavender, and he could almost hear her voice when he read them. Tomorrow would be another day at Pearl Harbor, routine drills, maintenance, and maybe some downtime to write Emma back. But tonight, he had plans to meet his friends at a small diner off base. They'd all heard whispers about war in Europe, but it still seemed so distant, so unreal. Even the growing tensions with Japan felt like a cloud far on the horizon, one that might never reach them. December 7, 1941, the morning sun hadn't even fully risen when Tom was jolted awake by a thunderous sound, a noise that rattled the metal frame of his bunk. For a second, he thought it might be a drill, a mistaken alarm. But then the next explosion hit, shaking the entire ship. Tom threw on his uniform, his heart pounding. He ran up to the deck, expecting to see an accident, something routine, maybe a malfunction. What he saw instead froze him in place. The sky above Pearl Harbor was filled with planes, diving and screeching across the horizon like dark birds of prey. Explosions erupted all around the harbor. Flames and smoke billowed from nearby ships, and the air was thick with the sound of gunfire and sirens. A bomb exploded on the deck of the USS Arizona, sending up a towering column of fire. Tom stood there for a split second, his mind unable to comprehend what was happening. This wasn't a drill. This was real. All hands on deck, a voice roared over the chaos. We're under attack. The reality crashed down on him like the bombs falling from the sky. Pearl Harbor was under attack. The Japanese, how had they made it here, so fast and without warning? He ran to his post, adrenaline surging through his veins. Men were shouting orders, scrambling to man the anti-aircraft guns, but the planes were coming too fast, dropping bombs and torpedoes with deadly precision. The USS West Virginia rocked violently as a torpedo struck her side. Water gushed in, and Tom could feel the ship lurch beneath him. They were sinking. Tom scrambled to help his fellow sailors, but the sight of the burning ships all around him, Oklahoma, Arizona, California, was overwhelming. This wasn't just an attack on their ships, it was an attack on everything they stood for. It was a war brought to their doorstep in a way no one had imagined. He saw friends go down, men he had shared meals and laughs with the night before, now swallowed by the chaos and flames. The harbor, once peaceful, was a scene from hell. Hours passed, though it felt like days. When the smoke finally began to clear, Pearl Harbor was unrecognizable. Ships that had once stood proudly in the harbor were now twisted, burning wrecks. Oil fires dotted the water, and the sky was a dull gray from the smoke. Tom was exhausted, his uniform soaked with seawater and sweat. His hands were blistered from hours of trying to keep the ship afloat, trying to save the lives of his shipmates. But there was nothing more they could do. The West Virginia had been critically damaged, along with so many others. Sitting on the edge of the dock, Tom stared out at the USS Arizona, still smoldering. The sight of it, split open and sinking, tore at his heart. Over 1,000 men had gone down with that ship. The weight of it pressed on him, suffocating. He thought of Emma. How could he explain this to her in a letter? How could anyone who hadn't seen this with their own eyes ever understand the devastation? More than that, what came next? War. It was inevitable now. Tom knew the United States could not stand by after this. Pearl Harbor had changed everything. The day after. On December 8, President Roosevelt's voice crackled over the ship's radio as Tom and the other survivors huddled together, still in shock. Yesterday, December 7, 1941, a date which will live in infamy, the United States of America was suddenly and deliberately attacked. The words hit hard. They were going to war, not just with Japan, but with the entire Axis. Everything they had trained for, every routine drill, every exercise, had led to this moment. But none of them had been prepared for the sheer horror they had witnessed. Pearl Harbor, once a symbol of naval strength, was now a graveyard. And yet, Tom felt something stirring deep within him, something beyond the sorrow and the anger. Resolve. The war was no longer a distant concept. It was here, and it demanded everything from them. Tom looked at the men beside him, men who had fought beside him, who had survived the impossible. They would fight again, for those they had lost, for their families back home, and for their country. Years later, when the war had ended, and the world had been reshaped by the battles fought across Europe and the Pacific, Tom returned to Pearl Harbor. The USS Arizona Memorial had been built by then, a solemn tribute to the men who had died that day. Tom stood there, looking at the white structure that floated above the sunken remains of the ship. He thought of the friends he had lost, the peace that had once defined Pearl Harbor, and the war that had followed. So much had changed. The world had changed. But even now, looking out over the quiet waters, Tom knew that Pearl Harbor would never be forgotten. It had become more than just a place. It was a symbol of resilience, of tragedy, and of the strength that had carried them through one of the darkest moments in history. He laid a single flower at the edge of the memorial, a quiet tribute to the lives lost, and to the battles yet to come.